I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Today, we're going to review an album from an artist that Tom and I have reviewed before.
Yes.
Laura Marling, Once I Was an Eagle. In 2011, Laura Marling, who is a European folk artist, who has a very distinct and addictive voice, in my opinion, which was very evident in the album we reviewed, the 2011 album, A Creature I Don't Know. Now, Once I Was an Eagle kind of took the experimental sound, like she has an experimental approach to folk music that I really appreciate, because she's willing to take risks and try new things and it's very expressionism, it's expressionistic, I don't know what the word is, but she's very expressive in her music, and that's something that I just feel translates very well to the folk genre, and also just how she writes her songs. She's just a brilliant guitar player and also vocalist. So I was really interested to see where she was going to take A Creature I Don't Know, where her sound was going to go from that album. Once I Was an Eagle comes out, and man, this thing is daunting. It is like 64 minutes long, somewhere in there, so it's over an hour, which is kind of, an hour of folk music. Think about that for a minute before you listen to this album. But the first thing that I noticed when I put on Once I Was an Eagle, and Tom, tell me your experience here, but the first thing I noticed was all these tracks seem to work together in
very
clusters.
much so. Yep.
Now, what was your take on that?
Well, after looking into it a bit, you find that this really is kind of a big concept album. And while it's not spelled out for you too explicitly, she's also certainly not trying to hide it. She's not really trying to make it confusing. It kind of tells a narrative about a female character that kind of goes through this phase where she doesn't want to be taken by naivety or love or romance or anything like that. So it's kind of like this epitomal, like, badass, I don't need a man type girl, which is a really cool approach, and she makes it really fit with the music, obviously with the lyrics.
Well, and one of my favorite things is the lyrics. Typically, lyrics that are that upfront and bitchy and just like in your face, I typically get kind of repulsed by, whether it's a male or female doing it. It doesn't really matter the sex. What matters is how they go about it. I feel like she's quite clever in how she crafts her lyrics together.
Yeah, because her lyrics are witty. They're not too forward and blunt about that. And plus, her voice is just so damn smooth. And it's great how she can go from this just very pretty, just kind of just sexy as hell voice to just completely badass, like she would tear my balls off if she could.
Like she goes from just like a soft whisper to yelling, almost like mid-word. Yeah. And how she's able to just craft and just add so much attitude to her lyrical lines. I mean, it's really cool.
And it works perfectly with the guitar also, which the guitar blew me away on this album. Some of the riffs, they remind me a lot of like the early Paul Simon solo stuff, or even like Nick Drake's Zeppelin 3 type acoustic Zeppelin stuff. I mean, just absolutely rocks. I would say that there's a lot more low points dynamically. This album's a little softer overall than The Creature I Don't Know.
Good point.
But the production is great.
Yes.
And I think that really helps enhance it, because they were very mindful of all the layers that are going on. Sometimes there can even be a lot going on in the mix, and it's still very quiet just because things are performed well, with a lot of tact, and they're also mixed in there well.
Right.
So kind of jumping back to the concept, going to this latter half of the album after the interlude track, you've got a little bit of a switch in sound. Some of the tunings change. She's using a lot of brighter chords. Her lyrics get a little more optimistic, and then in the end of the album, in the last track, she comes and says that naivety has failed her and everything, and it's this, the story kind of comes to a close. So it's a really neat approach, and it's really different than what she was doing on A Creature I Don't Know, because A Creature I Don't Know, I believe it was just 10 tracks.
It was more of a basic album.
It was just kind of song by song. Right. Each song had a lot of highs and lows dynamically, but it was more, they didn't quite... It wasn't necessarily that they worked together, but they still came together to make a good album, because they were all very quality songs. And I loved it for that reason. It was one of my favorites of 2011. I think I gave it like a 90. So it was a weird experience for me, because the first time I heard it, I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is great. I just love these guitar riffs. I love how the album flows. As I kept listening to it, I actually came down on it a bit, just because I found myself having trouble finding things to really grasp onto. And the reason for that is because I feel like, and I'm going to sound like a dick saying this, but I feel like this is one of those albums where the music suffers a little bit for the sake of the story and the concept. Just for the fact that I look at this track listing and there's 16 tracks, and while there are some highlights for me, there are several songs that, despite listening to this album probably at least 6 times, I just don't really care about and don't really remember. They don't stick out to me, and it's because they're just softer songs that work in the flow of the album and the story, but the vocal hooks aren't there, some of the intensity is not there, and it just doesn't really pull me back in.
Part of the reason for that, though, is that she grouped these tracks together into movements.
Yeah.
The first 4 tracks, you can't tell where the tracks end and the next tracks begin. And it actually took me quite, because I've been painting my house this past week and a half, and we've been listening to this while we paint. And my wife and I were like, oh, we like this part, and I'll go to see the song. I think it's track 1 still, and it's track 4, Breathe. I'm like, what's going on here? I don't understand. Really, what she did is she took movements and then broke them into pieces, almost like the Mars Volta did on Francis the Boot, where on this actual CD cut, they actually divided the track, the last track, which is supposed to be 30 minutes long, into a bunch of different pieces. It's almost like Laura Marling's doing that here, because especially on the first half, there's 2 distinct pieces there. Tracks 1 through 4 and tracks 5 through 7. My track picks, I picked 5, 6, and 7 because that entire movement to me blew me off my feet. And I really just, I really just got into just some of the more moody, darker complexions that she was adding to some of those tracks, specifically in Master Hunter and Little Love Caster.
Yeah, it was a great part of the album.
And really, the dynamics she put there were just fantastic. Now, I feel like that sort of structure and grouping where you're really taking one musical idea, expanding it very well, and from a songwriting approach, man, is she a good songwriter. But then breaking it into separate pieces for the track listing, it does make it hard to identify with just one piece of it. And I feel like that just makes this album generally more inaccessible than most music that's out there right now. And that's probably why I think both of us felt that this album was kind of hard to attach to. Now, the second half doesn't really make quite the same grouping of tracks, but there are definitely some similar tracks back there. And I just generally felt like there was a lot more she could have done to make this more engaging, especially in the back half of the album. Because the attitude of this album is on the front half, and exactly as you said, the album kind of suffers from the concept because really you want to have some attitude on the back half of your album.
And you don't get it.
You really need, anytime you make an album, I feel like you need to keep the listening experience balanced. You want enough allure in the first half of the album to get people really pumped up about what they're listening to, but then you also got to deliver on the last few tracks and give them something absolutely magical to look forward to.
And you'll notice on here that tracks 11 through 15, neither of us picked tracks from there. I just felt like it was a little bit of a lull. The intensity comes back in the end, and I think that the last track makes a good closing statement. But for a while before that, I gotta say, I just get a little bored with it because I feel like I've heard the musical ideas before, and I'm sure the reason that it worked out that way is because while you've heard the musical ideas before, you hadn't heard that part of the story before. So like I said, you have a case of the story taking the front seat to the actual music being put in the back, and that's a little frustrating to me.
Now, when an artist goes about a big, ambitious album like this, which I gotta give her kudos for because this is a big undertaking, I feel like one of the most important things you can do is really do something to establish an emotional warmth with the listener. You're just thrown into this. You don't really get an opportunity to survey it before you jump in. And that's something that I find with any concept album, you need to have a survey track. You need to have a track in the beginning of the album, usually the first or second track into the album, where you are given an idea and presented with this idea and you know what's coming. It's kind of the album's thesis statement. And if you're not given that, you're going to have a harder time understanding A, what you're listening to, and B, you're not going to have a harder time feeling the same things that the artist is intending you to feel. And I don't feel like Laura Marling did that for us here, which is why we're kind of not, you have to go all the way to the last track to really get a sense of what's actually happened. It would have just been nice if there would have been that other bookend on the album. And I don't feel like she thought that ahead of time. I really would have liked to have seen it. Would have boosted my score because I feel like a lot of the musicianship and songwriting and vocal presentation and lyrics on this album are just top notch. But when it comes to the actual presentation and craft of the album, which is what we grade on Velocities and music, I just feel like she missed the boat on a few things. So I'm going to settle on a score of 80.
I'm going 77.
Which is really funny because Tom started off loving this album and I was like, man, and then we switched spots. We really did, kind of met in the middle, but we both kind of juxtaposed positions a bit. So, if you guys are Laura Marling fans, folk music fans in general, like acoustic music and like female vocals with a keen wit, maybe something along the lines of Fiona Apple, because she's clearly influenced by Fiona Apple as well, definitely check out Once I Was an Eagle by Laura Marling and leave us a comment at www.velocitiesandmusic.com, or you youtube.com/velocities and music. We want to know what your guys' thoughts were on these albums, and if you agree or disagree with us and why. Also, please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums from 2013 you've been listening to and would like to see us review. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.
I see a lady dance yesterday. She is easily swayed.